You mentioned earlier that there was 20 years worth of data on this issue. I remember for a long time there was a lack of action to address what was evidently a growing problem, even if it's only growing because ships are getting bigger and the potential losses are getting bigger. Do you think that's a fair assessment? And what has industry done since to change things?
I think obviously the industry as a whole has continued to change. So, for example, the dangerous goods regulations, as I said, have a 2-year cycle, and each year there are new commodities that are added to the listing. Things are changed, the regulations are tweaked, different elements are put in. So that is one level of change that has been happening, well, as far as the IMDG code is concerned, since 1965. So there's a long history of change, and that often does come out of incidents. So as we've said about the MSC Flaminia, now there have been 2 changes arising out of that particular incident. So we do have a learning process that goes back quite a long time. Equally, we mentioned calcium hypochlorite, and there was quite a lot of profile given to that in the 90s as we had a spate of incidents, and that led to advice from the P&I clubs. There was work that went through the IMO, and that has carried on. More recently, perhaps, and perhaps more significantly, the lines have sought to collaborate with regard to safety incidents, and this goes back to about 2011 when CINS, Cargo Incident Notification System Network, was first put in place. So 5 major lines got together to work on a more collaborative basis, and that was looking fundamentally at capturing low-level incidents, and for me this is a major component of trying to learn. So although we have this history of major incidents, for me it's much more significant to get hold of what we might term as near misses or low-level incidents that are not just causing disruption but have the potential each time to be a much more major incident. So CINS started to develop this database of incidents, and they are continuing to capture those. And it's across the board. It isn't just dangerous goods, it's all type of cargo or container type of incidents that lead to some form of disruption on board or indeed on land. And that's then analysed to see, well, what can we learn from those? What sort of trends are we seeing? Are we seeing commodities from a particular area of the world giving rise to more of a problem? Or are we seeing whatever it is that needs to be changed in regulation, and then that would go through the channels towards IMO? And obviously there are NGOs as well as governments who are responsible for bringing those sorts of initiatives forward.
So are there any sort of firm indicators of, sources of hazard? Where are the risks coming from, or what are they involved? Is SINSNet throwing up that information yet?
Certainly SINS and others have, by focusing on some of the more major types of problem commodities, they've been able to list those, and so charcoal, calcium hypochlorite are amongst those inevitably. Things like fish meal also are in there as, interestingly, probably semi-bulk commodities that have now been containerized, which may be part of the indicator of where we're at. And particularly if you think of the history of the IMDG code as starting out as bulk shipment problems, if you think of a typical bulker which may have 1, 2, 5, 6 holds, for each of those holds you'd have a homogeneous cargo, which meant that there was much better opportunity to control what was happening in relation to that cargo. Obviously, it still had to be declared correctly, but assuming it was declared correctly, then everyone on board knew what was in that part of the ship. Whereas, obviously, on a container ship, you have thousands of containers in every hold. So the MSC Flaminia or MS Conam, in the area of the fire, you're talking of the best part of 3,000 containers that are damaged as a result of the fire. And each one of those not only could have one different commodity, but may, if it's a consolidated box, have literally 100 or more commodities in that one container. So it's one package within one container within a hold that can cause those sorts of problems.
Is it a different hazard then? Well, if we're talking about the anonymous box container, a 20-foot or 40-foot unit or whatever, which could have anything in and any hazard at all, compared to, say, a tank container, which at least you know is 23,000 litres of liquid, which may or may not be what it says on the outside, but it's almost like there's a different level of hazard between the two, or a different level of information available, I suppose. At least with a tank container, you know there's something homogeneous in there.
Yeah, certainly tank containers are generally homogeneous and would be more able to be controlled as long as they were on their own. But once they get in a hold and you've got hundreds of other containers around them that could be either impacted by some venting or leakage even, or themselves may give an impact to that container. So may, in a fire situation, that can start somewhere else, but heat up the tank container and cause a problem.
Yes, and there seems to be a constant feature of these incidents that, despite the fact that cargo manifests and information it seems to be available, it's very difficult to get a handle on what's involved in the fire. Is there any prospect that application of digital technologies or new IT might help us in this regard, do you think?
I think definitely there's possibility, and those who are focused on these sorts of issues, I'm sure will be thinking around how to do that. So the opportunity in a peer-to-peer type environment, in a blockchain world, then that ecosystem, by definition, should start to provide the validation that is necessary between the different stakeholders, and also ensure that any collection of data which is important to someone else can be passed without any interruption or distortion to that person. So in theory, digitization does help a lot. Obviously, we're talking about humans being involved in making that work as well.
And it depends on the quality of the data that's input into that system. So it depends on proper declaration.
Absolutely. Full declaration. And we've seen that in some cases where the declaration isn't full, or all the information that could have been made available hasn't been passed down the supply chain. In a blockchain environment, in my dream world, then that information is available, and everyone who has an interest in the totality of that information will be able to get hold of what they need in order to make the best possible decisions.
It seems to me, if this is your dream future, that there's an important role for ports to play, port authorities.
I think possibly we will have to wait for that. And obviously, as an insurer, I only generally see incidents that have happened. So I'm on the wrong end of the scale. I would hope that shippers and particularly the chemical industry, because they're the ones who are producing the polymerizing cargoes and therefore have the ability to know A, what their commodity is, and B, how best to control it, and C, what information needs to be passed on. They are the ones who control that, and hopefully they are becoming better prepared.
I like the hopefully. That's
Well, if they're going to be compliant, they will have to be having that information available. And one of the interesting sound bites from the MSC Flaminia judgment is the challenge really to the shipper community that says it isn't just about complying with the code, being compliant with the regulation. Actually, if there's anything else that you think is relevant or you know is relevant to that cargo, you need to be communicating that down the supply chain. And that's quite a powerful message, I think, that needs to get across to the shipper community.
Yeah, I suppose what concerns me is that even if shippers are passing information on, then freight forwarders and carriers may not be alert to that. And they need to be aware that other stuff is coming at them, quite apart from the basic particulars of the cargo involved.
That's one of the interesting things around more dangerous goods movements in general. So, as you'll be aware, the safety data sheets are generally going to be available around the commodity. And the way that that's communicated down the supply chain is haphazard, shall we say, or not consistent. So even where it is communicated, it generally goes with the contractual type documentation, the bill of lading and similar. Whereas for dangerous goods regulations, they have to complete a dangerous goods declaration. And that is used, obviously, in maritime for ship stowage. Those two documents are currently not compared. And even that would be a relatively simple step in digitisation to say, make sure you do have an SDS, make sure you've got the DDD, compare the two, and check that there aren't any inconsistencies.
Personally, I'm a bit doubtful about the role of the SDS in the transport chain.
I can understand that, and of course transport as an element within the SDS isn't even mandated.